The smell of antiseptic and vanilla candles from the hospital gift shop still haunts me. Even now, 3 years after my rebirth, I can close my eyes and be transported back to that sterile room where everything fell apart, where I learned that loving someone completely, sacrificing everything for them, means nothing when you're not the one they wanted to save. I remember the exact moment when Dr. Martinez delivered the news. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Marcus's bruised face. His ribs were bandaged, his left arm in a cast, but his eyes, those dark brown eyes I'd fallen in love with in college, were focused entirely on the empty chair beside his bed. "Where is she?" His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Not thank you for donating blood when the hospital ran short. Not thank you for staying by my side for 72 hours straight. Just where is she?" I knew he meant Celeste. Beautiful, ethereal Celeste with her platinum blonde hair and designer everything. The woman who'd been in the passenger seat when Marcus's car hit black ice on December 15th. The woman who'd walked away from the wreckage with nothing but a few scratches while Marcus had been trapped, bleeding, unconscious. The woman who hadn't visited him once in those 3 days. She's fine, Marcus," I said softly, adjusting the white chrysanthemums I'd brought. His favorite flowers, though he'd probably forgotten I knew that. "She was discharged the same night. Just some minor cuts." His face crumpled with relief, and something sharp twisted in my chest. Thank God. I was so worried. I thought maybe she was hurt worse than they told me. That's why she hasn't come to see me, right? She's probably still recovering. I didn't have the heart to tell him I'd seen Celeste at the Ritz-Carlton bar the night before, laughing with her friends, posting Instagram stories with champagne flutes and captions about living my best life. I didn't tell him that when I'd approached her, begged her to visit him, she'd looked at me with those ice blue eyes and said, "Why would I visit someone who's going to have permanent scars?" "I'm not running a charity, Elena." Instead, I squeezed his uninjured hand. "Just focus on getting better." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at his phone, scrolling through Celeste's social media. I watched his face change as he saw the photos. Her at parties, at galas, at expensive restaurants, all while he'd been fighting for his life. "She's probably just processing the trauma differently," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Over the next 2 weeks, I visited every day. I brought him books, real food to replace the hospital meals, and updates on his architectural firm. I fielded calls from clients, managed his appointments, essentially ran his life while he recovered. And every day he asked about Celeste. She never came. The day he was discharged, I helped him into my car. His penthouse apartment wasn't wheelchair accessible, something I'd tried to point out when he'd bought it, though he dismissed my concerns with a laugh and a comment about my cute practicality. Now, as he struggled with the steps, leaning heavily on crutches, I saw him truly understand the oversight. "I called Celeste," he said as I helped him settle onto his leather couch. "She's coming over tonight to explain everything." I nodded, though something cold settled in my stomach. I'd seen her Instagram story from an hour ago, boarding a flight to Milan with the caption, "New adventures await." She didn't come that night, or the next. On the third day, Marcus finally called her directly while I was organizing his medications. I could only hear his side of the conversation, but it was enough. "Celeste, thank God you answered. I guess who?" "No, I'm not guilt-tripping you. What do you mean, moving on? We were together for 2 years. What about the ring? I was going to propose after the new year." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, Marcus whispered, "Because I got hurt? Because I'm not perfect anymore?" The phone clattered to the floor. I found him 20 minutes later, staring at nothing, tears tracking down his cheeks. The proud, confident man I'd loved since we were 22 looked broken in a way that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. She said, he swallowed hard. She said she can't be with someone who reminds her of the accident, that she needs to prioritize her mental health. That I should understand. I sat beside him on the couch, careful not to jostle his injured ribs. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. You were right about her. His voice was flat, defeated. You tried to warn me, didn't you? Last year, when she missed your birthday party for that gallery opening? When she forgot about your promotion dinner? You saw what I didn't want to see. I had tried to warn him, gently, carefully, but Marcus had been so infatuated with Celeste's beauty. Her connections in high society, the way she looked on his arm at charity galas. My concerns had been dismissed as jealousy from his best friend who never moved on. That part, at least, had been true. She doesn't deserve you, I said, meaning it completely. Marcus turned to look at me then, really look at me, for the first time since the accident. I saw him take in my rumpled clothes. I'd been sleeping in his guest room to help with his recovery. My unwashed hair pulled back in a messy bun, the dark circles under my eyes from weeks of worry. Elena, he said softly, you've been here this whole time. Of course I have. You donated blood when I needed surgery. You've been managing my business, taking care of me. His voice grew quieter. Why? Because I love you, I wanted to say. Because I've loved you since the day we met in that structural engineering class, when you helped me understand load-bearing calculations and stayed up all night making sure I passed the exam. Because I've spent 8 years watching you date other women, hoping someday you'd see me as more than your reliable friend, Elena. Instead, I said, because that's what friends do. Something shifted in his expression. For a moment, I hoped. Elena, His phone buzzed, a text from Celeste. I couldn't see what it said, but I watched Marcus's face close off again, watched him retreat back into his pain. She's asking for her things back, he said dully. The jewelry I bought her, the key to this place. I can handle that, I offered quickly. No. He struggled to his feet, gripping his crutches. I need to do this myself. I need closure. That should have been my first warning. Marcus arranged to meet Celeste at Meridian, the upscale restaurant where they'd had their first date. He insisted on going alone despite his limited mobility. I spent the evening at home, pacing my apartment, checking my phone every 5 minutes. He called me at 11:30 p.m. Elena, can you come get me? I found him in the restaurant's parking lot, sitting on a bench in the December cold, still in his formal suit, but somehow looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His crutches lay beside him, and I realized he couldn't make it back to his car on his own. What happened? I asked, helping him stand. She brought him, Marcus said hollowly. Her new boyfriend, some tech mogul she met at a charity auction last month. She wanted me to meet him, to understand that she's happy now. My hands clenched involuntarily. Marcus? She was wearing the necklace I gave her for our anniversary, giving it to him, actually, right there at the table. She said she wanted to repurpose it for someone who could appreciate beautiful things. The drive back to his apartment was silent, except for his ragged breathing. I helped him inside, made him tea he didn't drink, sat with him until he fell asleep on the couch. That's when I found the pills. The prescription bottle was hidden behind the couch cushions, nearly empty, despite being filled just days earlier. My blood turned to ice as I read the label. OxyContin, prescribed for post-surgical pain. Take as needed. He'd taken nearly the entire bottle. I called 911 with shaking hands, performed CPR until the paramedics arrived, rode in the ambulance while they worked to stabilize him. At the hospital, I gave statements to police, called his parents, fielded questions from doctors about his mental state. Marcus survived, barely. When he woke up 2 days later, groggy and disoriented from the medications they'd given him, the first word out of his mouth was, Celeste. Not my name. Not gratitude that I'd found him in time, not acknowledgement that I'd saved his life. Celeste. She's not here, I said quietly. His eyes focused on me slowly, and I saw the exact moment he remembered what he'd done. Shame flickered across his features, followed immediately by something else. Something that looked almost like anger. Why? He asked. Why what? Why did you save me? His voice was hoarse, but there was an edge to it I'd never heard before. Why couldn't you just let me go to her? The words hit me like physical blows. I stared at him, This man I'd loved for 8 years who was angry at me for keeping him alive. Marcus, you were dying. Maybe that would have been better. He turned his face away from me. Maybe then she'd remember the good times. Maybe she'd feel guilty enough to care. You wanted to die for her attention? I wanted to die because living without her is... He stopped, seemed to realize what he was saying, but didn't take it back. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. I see. Elena, wait. No, it's fine. I understand. My voice sounded strange, distant. You're upset that you're still alive? That I interfered with your grand romantic gesture? That's not what I meant. Isn't it? I looked at him then, really looked at him. You're angry at me for saving your life because you'd rather be dead than alive without Celeste. Even though she doesn't care whether you live or die. Even though she's probably already moved on completely. Marcus's face flushed red. You don't understand what we had? What you had was an illusion. The words burst out of me before I could stop them. She never loved you, Marcus. She loved your money, your status, the way you looked on her arm. She abandoned you the moment you stopped being useful to her image. That's not true, eh? She didn't visit you once, not once. I was there every single day and she couldn't be bothered to send a text message. Because she was traumatized. She was at parties, I shouted, not caring that we were in a hospital. She was posting pictures with champagne and laughing with her friends while you were fighting for your life. Marcus stared at me, his mouth slightly open. And you know what the worst part is? My voice cracked. You'd rather be dead because of someone who doesn't care about you than alive with someone who does. The silence stretched between us, heavy and final. Helena, he said finally, I didn't know you felt... Don't. I held up a hand. Don't make this about my feelings. This is about the fact that you tried to kill yourself over someone who treats you like garbage, and you're angry at me for stopping you. I walked to the door, paused with my hand on the handle. For what it's worth, I said without turning around, I'm glad you're alive, even if you're not. I left him there and drove home through blurry tears, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That was the last time I spoke to Marcus Richardson in my first life. He was discharged 3 days later. I heard through mutual friends that he'd moved back in with his parents, that he was in therapy, that he was getting better. I deleted his number from my phone, unfollowed him on social media, avoided the places I knew he might be. 6 months later, I heard he was dating again. Someone new, someone I didn't know. I felt nothing but relief. A year after that, I was promoted to senior partner at my engineering firm. I bought a house in the suburbs, adopted a cat, started dating a kind man named David, who brought me flowers and remembered my birthday. 2 years after the hospital, I was happy. Genuinely, peacefully happy. That's when the accident happened. I don't remember much about the collision. One moment I was driving home from David's place, humming along to the radio, thinking about the weekend we'd planned. The next moment, everything was spinning, metal screaming against metal, glass exploding around me. I remember the strange, floating sensation as my consciousness left my body. I remember watching the paramedics work over my broken form, seeing David arrive at the hospital, seeing my parents crying in the waiting room. I remember the moment my heart stopped, and then I was 22 again. I woke up in my college dorm room, sunlight streaming through the windows, my roommate Sarah's alarm clock blaring across the room. For a moment, I was completely disoriented. The last thing I remembered was the accident, the hospital, the steady beep of machines flatlining. But here I was in a room I hadn't seen in over a decade, in a body that felt young and strong and completely familiar. It took me 3 days to accept that it was real, that somehow, impossibly, I'd been given a second chance. Sent back to the beginning of my senior year in college, 3 months before I'd meet Marcus Richardson in that structural engineering class, and this time I knew exactly what would happen. I knew Marcus would ask for help with the load-bearing calculations. I knew we'd stay up all night in the library, that he'd buy me coffee and make jokes about my meticulous note-taking. I knew we'd become inseparable friends, that I'd fall helplessly in love with him, that he'd never see me as anything more than reliable Elena. I knew about Celeste, about the years of heartbreak, about the accident and the hospital and his suicide attempt. I knew he'd choose death over life without her, that he'd resent me for saving him. This time, I made a different choice. When Marcus Richardson walked into Professor Chen's structural engineering class on that crisp October morning, I didn't look up from my textbook. When he struggled with the first assignment, I didn't offer help. When he approached my desk after class, confused and frustrated, I packed up my things and left without a word. I changed my entire trajectory. Instead of spending my senior year pining after Marcus, I focused on my studies. I joined the Society of Women Engineers, where I met brilliant, ambitious women who became lifelong friends. I applied for internships at top firms, networked with industry professionals, laid the groundwork for a career that would be entirely my own. I graduated summa cum laude and immediately landed a position at Chen and Associates, one of the most prestigious structural engineering firms in the city. While Marcus was still struggling through his final semester, he'd failed Professor Chen's class twice without my help. I was already working on high-profile projects, building my reputation. But I kept tabs on him. It was impossible not to, given our overlapping professional circles. Marcus eventually graduated, a year behind schedule, and took a job at a mid-tier architectural firm. Without my support and connections, his career trajectory was decidedly different. More importantly, without meeting me in that engineering class, he never got invited to the party where he met Celeste. Instead, he dated a series of forgettable women throughout his 20s. Nice enough girls, but no one who captured his imagination the way Celeste had. No one who inspired grand romantic gestures or thoughts of marriage. I, meanwhile, thrived. By age 26, I was a junior partner at my firm. By 28, I'd started my own company specializing in sustainable building design. By 30, I was a millionaire, featured on the cover of Architectural Digest as one of the industry's rising stars. I also met James Chen, Professor Chen's son, who had taken over his father's firm after retirement. James was brilliant, kind, and saw me as an equal partner in both business and life. We married when I was 29, a small ceremony surrounded by friends who actually cared about my happiness. It was at my wedding reception that I saw Marcus again for the first time in 7 years. He was there as a plus one, brought by one of James's colleagues. I barely recognized him at first. Gone was the confident, charismatic man I'd known in college. This Marcus looked tired, ordinary, like someone who'd never quite lived up to his potential. He spotted me across the room and approached with a hesitant smile. Elena Morrison? Or I guess it's Elena Chen now. He gestured to my wedding dress, the ring on my finger. Congratulations, this is incredible. Thank you. I kept my voice polite but distant. I can't believe this is your company, he continued, looking around at the elegant venue I'd booked for the reception. I mean, I knew you were successful, but Elena, you own half the skyline now. I've been fortunate. Fortunate? He laughed, but it sounded hollow. Right, like it was luck and not pure talent and determination. An awkward silence fell between us. I always wondered, Marcus said finally, why you never talked to me after that first day in Professor Chen's class. I thought maybe I'd offended you somehow, or... I looked at him then, really looked at him. In my first life, I would have done anything to have this conversation. I would have explained my feelings, hoped for understanding, maybe even forgiveness. Now I felt nothing but a distant sort of pity. I was focused on my career, I said simply. Right, of course. He shifted uncomfortably. Well, you certainly achieved your goals. I'm working on a small office building project right now. Nothing like what you do, but it's honest work. That's nice. Another silence. Elena, He stopped, shook his head. Never mind, this is your day. I should let you get back to your guests. He started to turn away, then paused. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I always regretted not getting to know you better in college. You were always so smart, so driven. I think I was intimidated by that. I nodded politely. Enjoy the reception, Marcus. I watched him walk away, then turned my attention back to James. who was regaling our friends with the story of our first date. My husband's laugh was warm and genuine, and when he caught my eye across the room, his face lit up with pure joy. That night, as James and I lay in bed in our honeymoon suite, I told him about the encounter. He seemed sad, I said, tracing patterns on James's chest. Do you feel bad for him? I thought about it seriously. No, I feel nothing really, like he's a stranger. That's healthy, James said, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. You can't save everyone, Elena, and you shouldn't have to. You can't save everyone. Those words would come back to haunt me 3 years later. I learned about the accident from a colleague who'd worked with Marcus on a small residential project. The details were eerily familiar: black ice, a car wreck, someone fighting for their life in the hospital, but this time, Marcus wasn't with Celeste. He was alone. According to the reports, he'd been driving home from a client meeting when his car hit a patch of ice and slammed into a concrete barrier. No other vehicles were involved. No passengers to worry about. Just Marcus, unconscious and bleeding, trapped in twisted metal. I found myself at the hospital before I'd made a conscious decision to go. Some part of me, the part that had loved him for so long in my first life, couldn't stay away. The ICU was exactly as I remembered it. The smell of antiseptic, the harsh fluorescent lights, the constant beeping of machines. Marcus looked smaller somehow, more fragile than he had 8 years earlier. His face was pale beneath the bruises, his breathing supported by machines. Are you family? A nurse asked. Old friend, I replied. He's been asking for someone named Elena, she said kindly. Is that you? My breath caught. He's conscious? On and off. The pain medications make him confused, but he keeps asking for Elena, says she'll know what to do. I sat beside his bed for a long time, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the steady beep of the heart monitor. This wasn't my responsibility anymore. In this life, we weren't friends. We barely knew each other, but when his eyes fluttered open and found mine, when he whispered my name with such relief and gratitude, I felt something crack inside my chest. Helena, he breathed, you came. I'm here. I knew you would. You always know when people need you. His words were slurred from the medication, but the sincerity in them was unmistakable. The doctors say I'll be okay, he continued. A few weeks in here, a couple months of physical therapy. Could have been worse. That's good news. Elena! His eyes struggled to focus on me. Will you call my parents? I don't think I have anyone else. The simple honesty of it broke my heart. In my first life, Marcus had been surrounded by friends, colleagues, a wide social circle, but without me as his anchor in college. Without the confidence boost that had led him to Celeste and her world, he'd never built those connections. He was alone. I stayed with him for 3 hours, making the calls he couldn't make, coordinating with his parents who lived across the country, speaking with doctors about his care plan. When he fell asleep, I left my number with the nursing staff and went home to James. How is he? My husband asked. Physically, he'll recover, but James, he's so isolated. I don't think he has anyone in his life. James studied my face carefully. What are you thinking? I don't know. In another life, we were close friends. If things had been different. But they weren't different, James said gently. You chose a different path, Elena. You chose us. And that was the right choice. He was right, of course. I'd built a beautiful life, a successful marriage, meaningful work. I'd avoided all the heartbreak and disappointment that had defined my relationship with Marcus in my first life. But knowing he was alone in that hospital room, believing he had no one who cared about him. I visited him twice more over the next week. Each time, his face lit up when he saw me, as if I were a miracle he couldn't quite believe. I keep thinking I'm dreaming, he said during my third visit. Elena Chen, successful businesswoman, taking time out of her busy schedule to sit with boring old me. You're not boring. I'm a mid-level architect working on strip malls and office parks. You design buildings that win awards. Success isn't everything, Marcus. He was quiet for a long moment. Isn't it? I mean, look at you. You have everything figured out. Beautiful marriage, thriving career, respect from your peers. You made all the right choices. Did I? I wondered. What about you? I asked. Are you happy? Marcus considered the question seriously. I thought I was. I have a decent job, a nice apartment, enough money to be comfortable. But lying here, realizing I didn't have anyone to call, it makes you think about what really matters. So, what do you think matters? Like, connection, I guess. Having people who care about you, people you care about in return. He looked at me with those familiar brown eyes. You're lucky to have that with James. I was lucky. James and I had built something real and lasting, based on mutual respect and genuine affection. It was everything a marriage should be. So, why did I feel so empty when I left the hospital that day? Marcus was discharged a week later. His parents had flown in to help him get settled, and I met them briefly when I stopped by with a care package of books and easy-to-prepare meals. You must be Elena, his mother said warmly. Marcus has told us so much about you. He says you've been like an angel through all this. I just did what anyone would do. No, Marcus said from his position on the couch, still moving carefully due to his injured ribs. Most people would have sent flowers and moved on. You stayed. After his parents left, I continued to visit Marcus occasionally. I told myself it was just to check on his recovery, to make sure he was managing okay on his own. But the truth was more complicated. In my first life, I'd been so focused on Marcus's rejection, his love for Celeste, his resentment of my help, that I'd never really seen him clearly. This Marcus, the one who'd never met Celeste, never experienced that grand, devastating love, was gentler somehow, more genuine. He was also desperately lonely. Do you ever wonder about the paths not taken? He asked one evening as I helped him organize his medications. Like, what if you'd made different choices in college? What if we'd been friends back then? I think about it sometimes, I admitted. I always thought you seemed interesting, brilliant, obviously, but also kind. I wanted to talk to you, but you seemed so focused, so untouchable. I wasn't untouchable, I was just scared. Of what? Of loving you and being ignored. Of giving everything and getting nothing back. Of watching you choose someone else over and over again. Of getting distracted from my goals, I said instead. Marcus nodded slowly. You made the right choice. Look at everything you've accomplished. But as the weeks passed, as I watched Marcus struggle through his recovery alone, I began to question whether I had made the right choice. Not about my career or my marriage. Those were unquestionably good decisions. But about cutting Marcus out of my life so completely. In my first life, loving him had nearly destroyed me. But this Marcus was different. He wasn't the confident, charismatic man who'd inspired obsessive devotion. He was just human, flawed and lonely and grateful for friendship. Maybe that was exactly what made him dangerous. Eliana, James said one night after I'd returned from another visit to Marcus's apartment. I'm starting to worry about you. What do you mean? You're spending a lot of time with him, and every time you come home, you seem different, distant. I wanted to deny it, but James knew me too well. He's going through a difficult time, I said carefully. He doesn't have anyone else. That's not your responsibility. I know that. Do you? James turned to face me fully. Because it feels like you're trying to save him. And we both know how that usually goes. I stared at my husband, this good man who'd given me everything I'd thought I wanted, and realized he was right. I was trying to save Marcus. Again. The difference was, this Marcus actually wanted to be saved. I think you should stop visiting him, James said quietly. James, I'm not asking as your husband. I'm asking as someone who loves you and doesn't want to see you get hurt. This man, whoever he was to you in college, whoever you imagined he could be, you need to let that go. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about paths not taken and choices that define us. In my first life, I'd chosen love and received heartbreak. In this life, I'd chosen wisdom and received success. But what if there was a third option? I didn't visit Marcus for 2 weeks after that conversation with James. I threw myself into work, took on new projects, planned a vacation with my husband to Italy. I tried to convince myself that James was right, that I was better off maintaining my distance. Then Marcus called. Helena, I'm sorry to bother you. I know you're busy, but his voice was shaky, scared. Something's wrong. I've been having these chest pains, and I think something's really wrong. I found him on the floor of his apartment, conscious but barely, his face gray with pain. The paramedics said later that he'd had a blood clot, a delayed complication from the car accident that could have killed him if I hadn't gotten there in time. As I rode in the ambulance beside him, holding his hand while the EMTs worked, I realized something crucial. I wasn't trying to save Marcus because I was still in love with him. I was trying to save him because he was worth saving. The surgery was successful, the clot was removed, circulation restored, crisis averted. Marcus would make a full recovery, the doctors assured me. You saved my life, he said when he woke up in recovery, his voice full of wonder. Again. The doctor saved your life. You called them. You found me. His eyes were bright with tears. Elena, if you hadn't come? I squeezed his hand gently, but I did come. Why? It was the same question he'd asked me 8 years earlier in my first life, but this time the context was completely different. This time, he wasn't angry, he was grateful. Because everyone deserves to have someone who cares whether they live or die, I said simply. Marcus stared at me for a long moment. Even me. Especially you. That night, James and I had the conversation I'd been dreading. I can't ask you to choose between him and me, my husband said as we sat in our living room, the space between us feeling like an ocean. But I also can't watch you disappear into someone else's crisis again. I'm not disappearing, You are, Elena. You've been disappearing for weeks. Every time he needs something, you drop everything. Every time he calls, you answer immediately. Every time he's in danger, you run to save him. He's alone, James. He doesn't have anyone else. And whose fault is that? The question came out sharper than James had intended, I could tell, but he didn't take it back. You said yourself that in college you barely knew each other. His isolation isn't something that happened to him, Elena. It's something he created. That's not fair, isn't it? You've built an entire life, a successful career, meaningful relationships, a marriage that works. He's done what exactly? And now you're supposed to sacrifice everything you've built to fix his mistakes? I wanted to argue, but part of me knew James was right. Marcus's loneliness wasn't entirely circumstantial. He'd had opportunities to build connections, to create a support system. He'd chosen not to. But that didn't change the fact that he was alone now when he needed help most. What are you saying? I asked quietly. I'm saying that I love you and I want you to be happy, but I won't be married to someone who's emotionally invested in another man. The ultimatum hung between us, unspoken but clear. I need time to think, I said. James nodded sadly. Take all the time you need. But Elena, think about what you're really choosing. Is it him? Or is it the idea of him? I spent the next 3 days alone in our guest room, thinking about love and duty and the weight of second chances. I thought about my first life, about the years I'd wasted pining after someone who couldn't see my worth. I thought about this life, about the happiness I'd built with James, the respect I'd earned in my career. And I thought about Marcus lying in that hospital bed, so grateful for the smallest kindness. On the 4th day, I made my decision. I went to see Marcus first, and he was back in his apartment, moving more carefully but clearly on the mend. His face lit up when he saw me, the same expression of joy and relief I'd seen so many times over the past few months. Elena, I was hoping you'd come by. I wanted to thank you again for... Marcus, I interrupted gently. We need to talk. Something in my tone must have warned him because his smile faded. Okay, he said cautiously. I sat down across from him, choosing my words carefully. I need you to understand something, I began. The reason I've been helping you, visiting you, caring about your recovery, it's not because I'm in love with you. His face went very still. Okay. In another life, maybe, things could have been different between us. But in this life, I made different choices. I chose James. I chose my career. I chose a path that didn't include you. I understand, Marcus said quietly, though I could see the hurt in his eyes. But I also need you to understand that just because I'm not in love with you doesn't mean I don't care about you. You matter, Marcus. Your life has value. Your happiness matters. Your recovery matters. Helena, let me finish. I took a deep breath. I'm going to keep caring about you. I'm going to keep checking on you, being your friend, helping when you need it. Not because I expect anything from you, not because I'm hoping for something romantic to develop, but because you deserve to have people in your life who care. Marcus stared at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. But, I continued, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to start building a life that doesn't depend on me. Make friends, date people, find hobbies, create connections. Because I can't be your only source of support. Why? He asked, though I suspected he already knew. Because it's not fair to either of us, and because my marriage is more important to me than our friendship. The words hung in the air between us, honest and brutal. Marcus nodded slowly. James asked you to choose. James asked me to be honest about what I want. And what I want is the life I've built with him. Even if it means abandoning me again. The question was like a slap. I'm not abandoning you, Marcus. I'm setting boundaries. It feels the same from where I'm sitting. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the conversation. Then maybe you need to find a different chair. I left him there and drove straight to James. My husband was in his study, pretending to read architectural journals, but clearly waiting for me. When I appeared in the doorway, he looked up with cautious hope. I choose you, I said simply. I choose us. The relief that flooded his face was answer enough. What about Marcus? Marcus will have to learn to save himself. James stood and crossed the room to me, pulling me into his arms. Yeah, are you sure? Completely. What changed your mind? I thought about it seriously. I realized that I wasn't trying to save Marcus because I loved him. I was trying to save him because, in my first life, I failed to save myself. James pulled back to look at me, confused by the reference to a first life he knew nothing about. I corrected quickly, because I spent so many years putting other people's needs before my own. This was just another version of that pattern. And now I choose myself. I choose my happiness. I choose the life we've built together. That night, as James and I renewed our vows in the privacy of our bedroom, making promises about prioritizing our marriage and our future, I felt the weight of my first life finally lifting from my shoulders. I had broken the cycle. For 6 months, I kept my word. I didn't visit Marcus, didn't call to check on him, didn't respond when he sent the occasional text asking how I was doing. It was harder than I'd expected. Part of me worried constantly about his recovery, his mental state, his continued isolation. But James and I thrived. We took that trip to Italy, renewed our focus on each other, talked seriously about starting a family. My business continued to grow, and I landed a contract to design a sustainable housing development that would define my career. I was happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Then I saw the news article. Local architect wins major competition. The photo showed Marcus accepting an award at the annual Architecture Excellence Awards, smiling broadly as he shook hands with the competition judge. According to the article, he'd won first place for his design of a community center that would serve low-income families in the downtown area. Architect Marcus Richardson credits his recent success to a renewed focus on meaningful work, the article quoted. After a difficult period following a serious car accident, Richardson says he's learned to appreciate the importance of community and connection in both his personal life and his professional practice. I stared at the photo for a long time. Marcus looked different, confident in a way I hadn't seen since college, but tempered with a humility that hadn't existed in my first life. He looked like a man who'd found his purpose. Good for him, James said when I showed him the article. It sounds like he took your advice about building a life for himself. It does. You don't sound happy about it. I considered the observation. I am happy for him. I'm just surprised, I guess. In my experience, Marcus doesn't usually respond well to challenges. People change, Elena, especially when they have to. That evening, I found myself researching the community center project Marcus had designed. It was brilliant, innovative, sustainable, and clearly created with deep consideration for the people who would use it. The design showed a level of empathy and social consciousness that the Marcus from my first life had never possessed. Maybe this was who he'd always been meant to become, without the distraction of Celeste's shallow world or the crutch of my unwavering support. 3 weeks later, I ran into him at a coffee shop downtown. I almost didn't recognize him at first. The tired, defeated man I'd left 6 months earlier had been replaced by someone who moved with purpose and confidence. He was with a woman, pretty in an understated way, laughing at something he'd said. He spotted me before I could escape. Elena, he approached with a genuine smile, the woman at his side. What a nice surprise. Congratulations on your award, I said politely. I saw the article. Thank you. It's been a good year. He gestured to the woman beside him. Elena, I'd like you to meet Sarah. Sarah, this is Elena Chen, the one I've told you about. Sarah extended her hand warmly. It's so nice to finally meet you. Marcus has shared so much about how you helped him through his recovery. I'm glad he's doing well, I replied, shaking her hand. We actually have you to thank for our meeting, Sarah continued with a laugh. Marcus joined my photography club when you told him to find hobbies. 6 months later, here we are. I looked at Marcus, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. You took my advice seriously. I took your warning seriously, he corrected. You were right. I needed to build a life that didn't depend on other people rescuing me. And how's that working out? Better than I expected. His eyes flicked to Sarah, and I saw genuine affection there. Turns out I'm more capable than I gave myself credit for. We chatted for a few more minutes about safe topics. His work, my latest project, the weather. But underneath the polite conversation, I could sense a shift in Marcus that went deeper than professional success or a new relationship. He seemed settled, content in a way that had nothing to do with external validation. As James and I prepared for bed that night, I found myself thinking about the encounter. He seemed happy, I told my husband. That's good, isn't it? Yes. It's just, in my experience, Marcus's happiness usually came at someone else's expense. Maybe that's the difference, James said thoughtfully. This time, he had to create his own happiness instead of taking it from someone else. I nodded, but something about the interaction continued to bother me. It took me 3 days to realize what it was. Marcus hadn't thanked me. In my first life, every interaction we'd had was colored by his gratitude or resentment for my help. Even during our recent friendship, his appreciation had been constant, almost overwhelming. But today he'd spoken to me like an equal, like someone he was glad to see, but not someone he owed his life to. For the first time since my rebirth, Marcus Richardson had looked at me and seen just Elena. Not Elena the savior, not Elena the rejected friend, not Elena the solution to his problems. Just Elena. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt strangely like loss. The feeling intensified over the following months as I occasionally encountered updates about Marcus's life through our shared professional circles. His community center project had led to other commissions. He'd been featured in Metropolitan Architecture magazine. He and Sarah had moved in together, and according to mutual acquaintances, they were talking about marriage. Meanwhile, my own life continued its successful trajectory. James and I started trying for a baby. My housing development broke ground, and I was invited to speak at conferences around the country about sustainable design, and everything was exactly as it should be. So why did I feel so empty? The answer came to me one evening as I was reviewing applications for a junior architect position at my firm. One of the candidates had graduated from our old university, and her portfolio included a project that had been inspired by the very structural engineering class where I'd first met Marcus. I realized that in trying so hard to avoid the pain of my first life, I'd also avoided the growth that came from it. In my first life, loving Marcus, even unsuccessfully, had taught me about resilience, about standing up for myself, about recognizing my own worth. The heartbreak had been devastating, but it had also been transformative. In this life, I'd avoided that pain by avoiding the relationship entirely. I'd built a successful career and a stable marriage, but I'd also built them from a place of fear rather than strength. I was successful, but I wasn't brave. I was happy, but I wasn't whole. That night, I dreamed about the accident that had sent me back in time. But this time, instead of the floating sensation of leaving my body, I remembered the moment of impact with perfect clarity. I'd been thinking about Marcus, not about James, not about my career, not about any of the beautiful life I'd built in my first timeline. In my final moment, my mind had gone to the man who'd resented me for saving his life, who'd chosen death over gratitude, who'd never loved me back. I woke up gasping, James's concerned face hovering over me in the darkness. "Elena, you were crying in your sleep." "I'm okay," I whispered, but I wasn't okay. I was 33 years old, successful beyond my wildest dreams, married to a wonderful man, and completely terrified that I'd wasted my second chance. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years and drove to the cemetery where my parents had been buried in my first life. Their graves didn't exist yet. In this timeline, they were still alive, still proud of their successful daughter, still happily retired in Florida. But I needed to visit the place where I'd once stood and promise them I'd live a better life. "I don't know what better means anymore," I said to the empty plot of grass where their headstones would someday stand. I thought it meant avoiding pain, making safe choices, protecting myself from heartbreak, but maybe it means something else. The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and for a moment I could almost hear my mother's voice. "Better means brave, Elena. Better means choosing love even when it's scary." I drove home slowly, thinking about courage and second chances, and the difference between avoiding pain and learning from it. James was waiting in the kitchen when I arrived, coffee already made, concern evident in every line of his body. "Do you want to talk about whatever's bothering you?" he asked gently. I sat down across from him, this good man who'd given me everything I'd thought I wanted, and finally told him the truth. "I'm not sure I know how to be happy," I admitted. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know how to be successful. I know how to be safe. I know how to make smart choices and build a stable life. But happiness, actual joy, I think I'm afraid of it." James reached across the table to take my hand. "What are you afraid of?" "That it won't last, that I'll lose it, that I'm not worth it." "Elena." "In college," I continued, "I was in love with someone who didn't love me back. It nearly destroyed me. So, in my life now, I made sure to choose someone who was safe. Someone I cared about, but didn't love so much that losing them would break me." James went very still. "Is that what I am to you? A safe choice?" "I thought so," I said honestly. "But somewhere along the way, you became more than that. You became home. But you're still afraid." "I'm terrified," I whispered, "because I do love you, James. I love you so much that losing you would destroy me. And I don't know how to live with that kind of vulnerability." James was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd told him. "Elena," he said finally, "do you think I don't know that I wasn't your first choice?" I stared at him shocked. "You think I haven't noticed the way you sometimes look at old college photos? The way you went to pieces when that man from your past needed help? The way you've never quite trusted that what we have is real?" "James, I've always known I was competing with a ghost," he said gently. "The question is whether you're ready to stop letting that ghost win." That afternoon, while James was at work, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I looked up Celeste. In my first life, she'd been the golden girl who'd stolen Marcus's heart and then broken it. In this timeline, without Marcus to elevate her social status, her trajectory had been quite different. She'd married young, a tech entrepreneur with more money than sense, and according to her social media was now divorced and working as a lifestyle blogger with a modest following. Her posts were a mix of wellness content and subtle sponsorship deals. The kind of carefully curated mediocrity that suggested someone still chasing the relevance she'd once taken for granted. She looked older than her years, her beauty now maintained rather than natural, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I felt a strange sort of pity looking at her photos. In my first life, Celeste had been the obstacle, the woman who'd had everything I wanted. In this life, she was just another person who'd made choices and lived with the consequences. We all were. That evening, I made dinner for James and told him about my afternoon research project. I looked up the woman Marcus was obsessed with in college, I said as we sat down to eat. And she's ordinary, human, not the goddess I'd built up in my mind. Most people are when you get past the fantasy. I nodded, then took a deep breath. James, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. If you could go back in time and choose differently, choose someone who loved you first, someone who wasn't carrying around baggage from another relationship, would you? James set down his fork and looked at me seriously. Elena, do you want to know what I fell in love with? What? Your strength, your resilience. The way you'd clearly been hurt badly but refused to let it make you bitter or cruel. The way you loved deeply even though it scared you. I felt tears prick at my eyes. You think your past is a liability, James continued, but it's not. It's what made you who you are. It's what taught you to appreciate what we have instead of taking it for granted. Even though I didn't choose you first, Elena, you choose me every day. You chose me this morning when you told me the truth about your fears. You chose me 6 months ago when Marcus needed help and you set boundaries to protect our marriage. You choose me every time you come home, every time you laugh at my terrible jokes, every time you trust me with your vulnerabilities. I was crying openly now. I do love you, so much it terrifies me. Good, James said, reaching across to wipe my tears. Love should be a little terrifying. That's how you know it matters. 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. The morning I took the test, James was already at work, and I found myself sitting on our bathroom floor, staring at the positive result, overwhelmed by a joy so intense it felt dangerous. This was what I'd been afraid of, caring so much about something that losing it would shatter me. But as I placed my hand on my still flat stomach, I realized that some risks were worth taking. I called James first, then my parents, then took the afternoon off to simply sit in our garden and think about the future. That's where I was when Marcus called. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since that chance encounter at the coffee shop, and I couldn't imagine what he might need after all this time. Elena. His voice was different, shaky, scared in a way that immediately transported me back to the hospital calls of months past. I'm sorry to bother you. I know we haven't talked, but I didn't know who else to call. My blood turned cold. What's wrong? It's Sarah. She's been in an accident. She's in surgery now, and they don't know. They can't tell me if... His voice broke, and I could hear the familiar sound of Marcus falling apart. Which hospital? I asked, already reaching for my keys. Metro General, but Elena, you don't have to... I'll be there in 20 minutes. I found him in the surgical waiting room, looking exactly as devastated as I'd expected. But there was something different about his grief this time. It was real, immediate, focused entirely on Sarah rather than himself. How long has she been in surgery? I asked, sitting beside him. 3 hours. They said it could be 6 more. Elena, if she doesn't make it... He looked at me with eyes full of genuine fear. I don't know how to live without her. Tell me what happened. Drunk driver ran a red light, hit her car on the driver's side. His hands were shaking. She was coming to meet me for lunch. If I hadn't suggested that restaurant, if we'd picked somewhere else. Marcus, stop. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? I feel like everything I touch gets destroyed. First, my own accident, now this. I looked at him carefully. Do you still blame me for saving your life? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What? No, of course not. Elena, you saved me in more ways than just medically. If you hadn't forced me to build my own life, I never would have met Sarah. I never would have become someone worth loving. And if Sarah dies, will you blame me for introducing you to her indirectly? No, he said immediately, then stopped. I. No, that's not the same thing. Isn't it? You're taking responsibility for circumstances completely outside your control, just like you did with your accident, just like you did with Celeste. Marcus stared at me. You remember Celeste? I realized my mistake immediately, but there was no taking it back. You mentioned her once, when you were on pain medication in the hospital. Did I? He looked confused. I barely remember those first few days. The point is, I said quickly, some things are just random, Marcus. Accidents happen. People make choices that hurt us. That doesn't mean we're cursed or that love is dangerous. It means we're human. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the hospital around us. Elena, Marcus said finally, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you come today? After everything, after the boundaries you set? Why are you here? I thought about it seriously. Because everyone deserves to have someone with them when they're scared. And because you're my friend. Not my responsibility, not my project, just my friend. Even though I'm a mess, especially because you're a mess, perfect people don't need friends. Marcus laughed despite himself. Sarah would like you, you know. She asks about you sometimes. Wonders what kind of person inspires such loyalty. What do you tell her? That you're the strongest person I know and the kindest. I'm not that strong. You are, Marcus insisted. Do you know what I learned this year? Real strength isn't never falling down, it's getting back up. And you've been getting back up your whole life. Before I could respond, a surgeon appeared in the doorway, still in scrubs. Mr. Richardson? Marcus shot to his feet. How is she? The surgery went well. We were able to repair the internal bleeding and stabilize the fractures. She's going to have a long recovery, but she should make a full recovery. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, sobbing with relief. I stayed with him until Sarah was moved to recovery and he could see her. She was unconscious but stable, surrounded by monitors that beeped reassuringly. She looks so small, Marcus whispered, taking her hand carefully. She's tougher than she looks, I said, though I barely knew Sarah. She'd have to be to put up with you. Marcus smiled through his tears. Elena? Yeah. Thank you for coming, for staying, for everything. I know I don't deserve. Yeah. Marcus, I interrupted gently. Stop keeping score. Sarah loves you. I care about you. James tolerates you. That's not about what you deserve. It's about who we choose to be. I left him there with Sarah and drove home to James, who was waiting with takeout and worried eyes. How is she? He asked as I fell into his arms. She'll be okay. Long recovery, but okay. And how are you? I thought about the question seriously. I'm good, really good. For the first time in a long time, I think I understand the difference between loving someone and trying to save them. And what's the difference? Love gives people the space to save themselves. That night, as James and I lay in bed talking about baby names and nursery colors, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of losing James, not of failing as a mother, not of the random cruelties of life that could steal everything I cared about in an instant. I was still aware of those possibilities. Sarah's accident had reminded me how fragile everything was. But I wasn't afraid. Because I'd learned something in my 2 lives that had taken me far too long to understand. The alternative to risking heartbreak isn't safety. It's emptiness. And I was done being empty. 6 months later, Sarah had recovered enough to attend our baby shower. She arrived with Marcus, both of them glowing with the news of their own engagement. I watched them together, seeing the easy affection and mutual respect that had been missing from every relationship in Marcus's first life. You know, Sarah said, as we stood together watching James attempt to assemble a high chair, Marcus told me that you two were friends in college. We were in the same classes, I said carefully. He also told me that you probably could have been more than friends if circumstances had been different. I looked at her, surprised by her directness. I hope that doesn't make you uncomfortable, Sarah continued. I just wanted you to know that I'm grateful. For what? For being the person who taught him how to be a friend before he learned how to be a partner. He's told me about how you set boundaries with him, how you forced him to build his own life. He says it made him a better man. I watched Marcus laughing with James across the room, both men covered in various pieces of baby furniture, and felt a deep sense of peace. He was always a good man, I said. He just needed to learn to see it himself. When our daughter was born 3 months later, Marcus and Sarah were among the first visitors. They brought flowers and offered to help with anything we needed, then left after an appropriate amount of time. As James and I sat together that evening, our tiny daughter sleeping peacefully in my arms, I thought about second chances and the courage to love without guarantees. Do you think she'll be brave? I asked, looking down at our perfect, fragile child. I think she'll be honest, James said, and that's even better. I kissed the top of our daughter's head and silently promised her something I wished someone had promised me at her age. That love, real love, was always worth the risk. Even when it hurt, even when it ended, even when it didn't turn out the way you'd planned. Especially then. In my first life, I'd loved Marcus Richardson with everything I had and received nothing but heartbreak in return. It had nearly destroyed me, but it had also taught me how to be strong. In my second life, I'd avoided that pain by avoiding the relationship entirely. I'd built a beautiful life, but I'd built it from a place of fear. Now, holding my daughter, married to a man who loved me completely, surrounded by friends who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could do for them, I finally understood what my second chance had really been about. It wasn't about avoiding the mistakes of my first life. It was about learning from them. Marcus had needed to learn to save himself. I had needed to learn to let him. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest love of all, loving someone enough to let them find their own way to happiness, even if that path led away from you. Outside our window, snow was beginning to fall, and I thought about black ice and car accidents and all the random moments that could change everything in an instant. But I wasn't afraid. I was ready for whatever came next. Epilogue. 5 years later, I received an invitation to Marcus and Sarah's wedding. It was a small ceremony, they said, just close friends and family. They hoped James and I could attend. I almost didn't go. Not because I still harbored feelings for Marcus, but because I wasn't sure what role I played in their story anymore. Was I the friend who'd helped them find each other? The woman who'd almost derailed their happiness? Something in between? In the end, James convinced me that the answer didn't matter. "You're Elena Chen," he said as he helped me zip up my dress. "Successful architect, devoted wife, amazing mother, loyal friend. You don't need to be anything else." The wedding was beautiful. Sarah wore a simple dress that made her glow with happiness. Marcus cried when he saw her walking down the aisle, and for a moment, I was transported back to college, remembering why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. But the feeling was distant now, like remembering a movie you'd enjoyed but wouldn't need to see again. During the reception, Marcus found me at our table. "Elena, I'm so glad you came. It means everything to Sarah and me." "Thank you for inviting us. It was a beautiful ceremony." "I wanted to give you something," he said, pulling a small wrapped box from his pocket. Sarah helped me pick it out. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet engraved with a simple message. "For Elena, who teaches by example." "I don't understand," I said. "You showed me what it looked like to love someone without trying to own them," Marcus explained. "To care about someone without making it about yourself. Sarah and we have what we have because you taught me the difference between love and possession." And I looked across the room at Sarah, who was laughing with my husband, our 5-year-old daughter charming everyone within reach. "You figured that out on your own," I said. "Maybe, but you gave me the space to do it." As James and I drove home that night, our daughter asleep in the back seat, I thought about the strange circular nature of love and friendship and second chances. In my first life, I'd tried to save Marcus and nearly lost myself. In my second life, I'd learned to save myself and accidentally taught him to do the same. Maybe that's what wisdom really was. Not avoiding the storms, but learning to dance in the rain. Happy? James asked, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I looked at my husband, thought about our daughter, our life, our future, and felt something I'd never experienced in either lifetime: complete contentment. Yes, I said simply, I am. And for the first time since my rebirth, I meant it completely.